community, the Counter-UAS community, the people who are doing UAV forensics research. What are our challenges? What is it that we need to step up, take care of, so that we can be better contributors to national security, to site security, to all of these things that protecting society against malicious UAVs. Senator Cory Gardner, Colorado, January 8, 2020, after the whole Colorado drone problem, publicly stood up and said something that is one of the most important things in this presentation. There's a significant gap in the understanding, and our understanding, personal understanding, and the national security's understanding of the threat that drones pose to the United States. If we don't understand the threat that these drones pose to us, we cannot even have a rational discussion about how to defend against them, much less actually build those defenses. So problem one is understanding the threat. Problem two is downplaying the threat. Kelsey Atherton, I follow on Twitter. I read his articles. He does some great stuff. He understands military, he understands regulatory, he understands politics. Really good writer. I admire the heck out of him. However, in a Forbes article that had to do with nuclear reactor site security vis-a-vis drones, he concluded that there is no risk posed by small drones until they get the ability to carry larger, heavier payloads without losing much flight time. And until those happen, only then should we rethink our infrastructure hardening. I will stand up here or sit here and raise my hand and say, those things are already possible. And earlier in this presentation and other presentations, we demonstrated that. If Saudi Aramco was probably a nation state actor, okay, so maybe not that, but the attack on the Russian airbase was certainly something that demonstrates that you can get heavy payloads over long distances, and that was in 2018. So it's beyond time for rethinking infrastructure hardening, and this sort of thinking, I feel, is downplaying the issue and not focusing time, attention, and resources on where the problems are. Joseph Rivers, this came out of the FOIA release from the Palo Verde incident. He makes two really good points here. Putting regulations in place is not going to stop the motivated actor. So restricted airspace is not going to stop anything. He asserts that detection systems, counter-UAS systems, have limited success rates. I would generally agree with him, unfortunately. And there's a low likelihood that law enforcement will arrive quickly enough to go find the operators. His take, I agree, we should focus our attention on getting federal regulations and laws changed to allow sites to defend themselves and get the resources required to identify engineering fixes that would mitigate the adversarial attack. So if a UAV does get in, how do we mitigate against that? Jacob's presentation just prior to mine is spot on this, and that is an incredibly important part of the conversation, and we should not walk away from today's wonderful presentations thinking that it's only technical solutions. There's legal solutions, there's information sharing solutions, there's a lot of other things that need to be done in addition to technical solutions. Remote ID and UTM. There's a belief that remote ID, UTM are going to solve a lot of this problem. We just need to wait. Well, first of all, they're probably 3 years out. Second of all, and most of this comes from my cybersecurity background, these are likely to be federated solutions put together by commercial vendors who must make a profit, who are then working with government entities who may be under-resourced, and they are all working together to collaborate to build these systems, and those systems must have perfect cybersecurity or they are going to be part of the problem. Some of the problems are, there's going to be a legitimate backdoor. We have seen this in other circumstances. We've seen the FBI asking or demanding that Apple create backdoors in their system. There's not going to be a remote ID system and a UTM system that does not have legitimate backdoors in it for use for national security reasons. If they're legitimate backdoors, there's a good chance those backdoors will get compromised and used for non-legitimate purposes, and then there's the pure exploits. So it's going to be a complex cybersecurity system. There are going to be problems with it. People will exploit that. They will find ways of manipulating remote ID and UTM for their own purposes. There's also a lot of quote valid, unquote reasons not to disclose where drones are operating and why. Amazon's not going to want anybody other than Amazon to have really detailed knowledge of where all their UAVs are going, how much payload they were carrying, what their flight times were. This is all business intellectual property. It's competitive intelligence. And then there's, national security flights. There's going to be law enforcement flights. There's going to be all these carve-outs where people are going to have some sort of reason to say, hey, wait, I should not be squawking some sort of remote ID, and I should not be participating in the UTM system. We're going to have to work through that, and I'll point back to Jacob and say, hey, look, this is going to fall in your court because it's going to be a legal issue and a regulatory issue. Malicious operators will hide in the gaps in the noise. The gaps may exist simply because of flaws in the system. They may create those gaps themselves through the exploits. I love the FAA. I'm a manned pilot. Through the nature of how the national airspace has been managed over the decades, it's a remarkably safe space to operate, and they are coming at unmanned vehicles from that same perspective of we're looking for zero fault airspace. Unfortunately, they got a really poor track record of enforcing any sort of compliance. And if somebody's not complying with remote ID or not complying with UTM, what are the consequences for not complying? We're going to have to work our way through that. Hobbyists, open source activists, foreign tech imports will likely create a non-compliant noise floor to hide in as well. If you are trying to attack or surveil some facility and there's a bunch of hobbyists flying in the area who are intentionally non-compliant, that creates a noise floor for you to operate in. Or you could have some of your, quote, friends go be non-compliant hobbyists while you are tangentially working with them and flying inside their noise envelope. Other people have mentioned this, and I'm glad they did, because I find it incredibly frustrating. There's an enormous number of counter-UAS vendors out there. In 2018, there was 230 of them. I'm sure it's increased by now. I've worked in the counter-UAS test and evaluation space and still am. So I've been talking to people in the DoD and the government about, on the procurement side, they don't know what works and what doesn't. And this is where I think we as an industry need to get our act together. If you are a site operator and you want to know what counter-UAS systems works best in your environment, close to an urban area, hot and humid because you're down in Louisiana, no good lines of sight because there are refineries next door to you, which counter-UAS systems have been deployed in a similar environment, and what sorts of flight profiles, what sort of threat profiles were flown against those systems, and when were those tests done? That we need to have standardized testing of counter-UAS systems in multiple types of environments, that we can do repeatability, we can do compare and contrast. Otherwise, as this counter-UAS researcher put it, we have no source of truth. Somehow, we've got to go solve that problem. So take-homes from that one are, we really don't know what systems do or do not work. And if they work in one environment, we don't know whether they work as well in another environment, and we don't know what threats they work against or don't work against. For example, if somebody changes the RF link, are they going to work against that? Just an example. Threat information is siloed. I'll talk about how we might be able to solve that towards the end of this presentation. But all of us need to be thinking about how do we help inform other people in the space of protecting this infrastructure to do a better job of it. And the last one bothers me across the board. I see requests for proposals for counter-UAS systems or things like that that are addressing last year's problems. What was ISIS using in 2018? Or what is the cartel using in Mexico in 2020? Drone swarms exist. Autonomous drone swarms exist. Jet turbine UAVs exist. All of these things are possible, and we as a community, and in collaboration with the governments that we're working with, and in collaboration with the people that we are trying to defend, need to start thinking actively and talking about it, not just thinking about it, but talking about it and saying, okay, what's coming down the pike, and how do we, if not get ahead of that, how do we catch up with it?